Alright, I have the chrome trim plate here. Make sure I put it on the camera the right way round. This can be held on with the strap lug from this end and a single screw going on there, I think. So we'll find that single screw first, which just needs to be a fairly unmutilated example of this size. Some of these screws are less pretty, and that's because they were used to hold the chrome trim on the base plate and have been filled with glue and generally chewed up. I'm just looking at the state of this strap lug and just deciding whether it's straight enough. It looks okay. It's been straightened up previously. I can tell by the shape of it that someone has done some work on that with a pair of pliers. It'll be adequate. I'm certainly reluctant to try to modify it any further, because there's every likelihood that you would end up breaking that piece. And normally I push that strap lug towards the end of the body as far as it will go and do up those two screws. That's all that's required for that. And our next task will be to install the shutter cocking rack, which I've got to inspect and make sure that the teeth are all good and not misshapen or damaged. And it all looks good, but there's a bit of a dirty patch in the teeth right at this point. Might be some dirt or something embedded in there. I'm just going to see if it'll move with my end of the pair of tweezers. Just a slight patch of oxidation, I think. I don't think there's any damage there to speak of. So that rack, that can go into place. So I'll use some synthetic grease, and I want to do the teeth at both ends of that rack. And I'll just give a quick wipe to the underside. Drop that rack down into place. That looks good. There's a little tiny bit of space at this end. We've got one tooth fully engaged at the front end. Now there's like a washer there. It's a roller that end of that rack is supported by. That has to be in position. There is a special screw that goes down through that roller. It's only threaded right at the end. The top part is machined to a specific diameter so that that roller is supported by the screw. And I'll put a tiny spot of molybdenum on that shaft of that screw, not the threaded part. Pass that through the strap lug through that washer into the top cover, and I should have one more screw that looks like that which fits there. Do those two up tight. Now we have a clampdown plate here, which you wriggle on over the top of that cocking rack. This is held in with 2 screws. I'll just nip those screws up. Now I need to check whether the mechanism works correctly. First I press the release lever down, hold down the lock lever with my finger, revolve the film advance, the cocking rack moves forward smoothly, no hesitation. The film advance releases at the end of its stroke, returns to the rest position, the cocking rack is fine. So that's good, nice smooth action there, that's all good. The cocking rack, as you might see here, as I move the cocking rack it rotates the transfer shaft because that's geared to the back of that cocking rack. You watch that take up that transfer shaft there rotate. And that action of course would be transmitted to the back of the shutter at this point. So at this stage, just reviewing what I've got and what mistakes I've made. I know what I haven't done. I haven't got my baffle in place. In order to get my baffle in place, I need to swing this arm forward. And in order to swing my arm forward, I have to have my chrome trim off the top. So I'm just going to be undoing things for about 30 seconds and we'll get that baffle back in place, and then I will instantly put everything back in place while you're not watching. Here we have the baffle that I should have installed earlier and for one reason or another didn't quite get there. And we have the baffle is in 2 pieces. You've got a main plastic baffle and this little baffle that goes inside it. Now I'm just checking which way round this goes. These tabs are bent down differently. The hollows in the plastic that it sits into are at different heights. So I'm making sure I've got it round the right way and that it actually sits flush. And it sits most flush in that direction. Now to stop this thing falling out while I'm installing it, I'm just going to put a little dab of glue under that edge and under that edge, and that'll tend to keep that thing from falling to pieces while I'm installing it into the camera. And it's not so much a problem when you're installing it into the camera as it is a problem of when you go to fit the shutter and that baffle falls out of place and you can't push the shutter back far enough. Right, so I will prepare the body and we'll put this in place. To install the baffle, I'm swinging the rangefinder coupling arms forward out of the way. Oh, I noticed that the spring fell off again, that's very handy. Let me pop that back in place. And our baffle goes in. It only goes in one way. And then we can pop our levers back into position. Now I can fit the top plate, and before we know it, we're back where we started off. Well, we have the camera body complete with the baffle in position, and now it's ready to have the exposure meter fitted, and that it also involves putting the shutter release and film release button on the top prior to that, but that's very minor. So I'll get that ready to go. And I think with this camera I was going to put a new meter cord on there. Let me just check the one that came with the camera and see if it's in a good condition. It's not frayed at all. No, I think that's adequate. We will use that one again. Right, the joy of fitting exposure meters to a Retina IIIS, or a Reflex S for that matter, because it's the same deal. Right, we can start with the film advance at the shutter release and the film release button. Just put a little smear of molybdenum in each of those. And we've got two springs here. The longer of the two goes on the film release button. The shorter of the two goes on the shutter release shaft. And on the shutter release shaft I'm just putting a smear of molybdenum on that back surface where it rubs against this post. That's the shorter of the two springs. That drops in there like that. So far so good. Now our meter can go on now. Before I put that in place, I'm just going to lock the screw here on the top of that little pinion on top of the film advance shaft with a touch of lacquer, just to stop that screw backing out. You need very little to do that because it's not really prone to coming loose. Just occasionally I'll find them loose. I know as a camera I was dealing with very recently that had a loose screw there. I don't know if it was this one. So our meter. Let's put a little bit of grease on the top of that film advance. Our meter hooks in here, sits down in the body. That's it, it's in place. Now the cord for the meter. This is the entertaining part. Has to go through a hole in the body here, so I'm going to put a little loop of wire down there so I can pull this cord back up. That's that. I'll get that roughly even. That's roughly even. Now we have to get the cord round the drum at the top here. So it goes round the back. Round again. That's it, round the drum there at the meter. Now the bottom peak, the one that's coming from this direction, goes to the bottom pulley and goes to the front position here. The other one goes to the back position. I'll pull some tension on that cord so that it sits in place, and I'm checking the lay of the cord across the drum here to make sure that it's not crossing over. and is sitting down in the groove. It's crossing over at that point. Let me just straighten that up. That's better. That's good. I've got that cord where it needs to be. Now I want to hold it in this position while I'm working on getting it on the drum at the base of the camera. I'll zoom you in a bit. And the way I do this is using a couple of washers. Place one washer on there. This hole, threaded hole in this post is made for this purpose. Put a washer there. Another washer. The screw, I'll run that screw in there. Now I'm going to trap that cord in between the washers. So I've got one on one side and one on the other, and I'll just nip that screw up lightly. Now what I've done is it means that this cord's not going to fall off this drum now because it's under a certain degree of tension. And I'm watching closely to see which way my cable runs here. So the cable from the front pulley here I have got running over to this side, and the cable from the back of the pulley here I've got running over to this side. So this goes to the back pulley down here, this one goes to the front pulley at this stage. And now I've got to get them wound onto this drum here. Now this is always a challenge, but like most challenging jobs, it can be achieved. Otherwise no one would ever have been able to build these damn things. So I'll put a smear of synthetic grease on the inside of this so it runs smoothly on the shaft. That drum of course goes there. In case you're not aware of it, this is a double pulley, as is that one there. So it's got a front pulley and a rear pulley. The front cord from the front pulley goes to the bottom of the drum here and winds around that way. The cord from the rear pulley goes to the top of this drum and winds around that way. Here are two slots on this drum. The cord runs into the opposite slots for each direction. That's the front cord to the front pulley in place. You have to be careful not to get these twisted. That goes to the rear. This one goes to the front pulley. I'm checking to make sure I've got no twists, and I've got it running over the top of the drum here. That's no good. Let me just rescue that. That looks right. Now I'm going to remove my screw here and the washers. Checking the lay of that cord, make sure it's correct. That all looks good. Now we need to tension this pulley here, needs to be tensioned, so I'm going to get its spring in position. That pops down in there. This gets lifted out and round to there. So now we have our cord tensioned and all connected to the drum at the top. So by rotating the drum at the bottom of the camera, it should rotate the meter drum at the top of the camera. And you can see that it does. So now I'm just going to poke and prod at the silk cord to get the cable running nice and tidily. That all looks good. I'll just pull that front cord right to the front of that drum. And that position there, with the bottom cord coming around the drum and back to this point, is where that meter setting should be. And at that stage, the needle at the back here should be somewhere near the front of its movement, somewhere like that. And we'll come back and set that accurately later. But that's the meter in place. The adjustment of the meter can be done after the front of the camera and everything is in place, because all our adjustment takes place here, and that's because we hook the cord into a notch in that drum to locate it. So there we have the camera body ready to receive the shutter assembly from the front. To stop my meter coming adrift, because sometimes when you're working on the camera you can knock this loose, and then of course the cord comes off and you're back to square one. I've got a top piece of the camera body that I can put on there. It's actually off a Reflex S, but it's cut out to allow me to use it on a Reflex S or this camera. If I can just lay my hands on it, we'll be in business. Here we go. I'll pop the shutter release button in place. Pop this top cover in place. And that will hold everything in there so I can't lose anything. I'll put one screw in at each end of the body to hold the top cover in place. That looks fine. I'm going to prepare my meter better so that it's I've got this where I need it to be. I really need this to be at the ASA 10 setting. I'll just move it around to there. That's right. Get my drum where I want the drum to be, which is there. That looks fine. This camera is ready to have the shutter assembly fitted. To fit the shutter assembly, we start with our shim washers, these spring-loaded shim washers, and in this case we have 12 shim washers. On some cameras you will find 8. These are easy to dislodge while you're trying to get the front of the camera in place. So you have to be quite patient at doing this.